I think that it is very important when we are trying to understand a natal chart to look at the essential dignities according to the Rothus, which is, I think, is very important when we try to understand if we are having um, a possibility to act in a more healthy way, especially in our personal relationships. So if you are a woman, look at your moon and look at your Venus to understand better how you react in your relationships. If you are a man, look at your Sun and your Mars and try to understand how you really communicate with the others and how you understand your relationships. But also, if you are a woman, look at your Sun and your Mars, especially if you are gonna try to understand what kind of people you are attracted to. And the opposite, if you're a man, look at your moon and your Venus to understand what is the core concept of the woman that you really like. If you're a woman with a bad positioned sun or a bad positioned Mars, you're usually into having problems with your relationships because you are usually towards looking problematic figures, maybe because of your parents, looking at psychoanalysis, maybe because of the race you had in your environment, or even because of your biological tendencies. We can see that because we usually, even in adopted children, we can see that problematic biological mother had also a daughter having also problems in choosing the right person, and while there was no communication between them, we could see that there is something that connects, a link between the mother and the daughter, something that connects us with the past. And this has to do with the inheritance model I'm going to show you later. So if you know how to do this table, I think it's great to understand if your planets is in a good way, if they express themselves. I always use the Rothus, and I'm not using Ptolemy essential dignities. So when we are looking at the biological aspects, we have to look at the strong effects that all the signs have from the 5th degree to the 16th degree. So there is an increased biological tendency. You have Moon in Taurus, which is a great position. This biological tendency is even greater. You have Moon in Scorpio, which is a rather weak and has some problems in expressing in emotional expressions. Then this biological tendency is even worse. Then we have this balance biological tendency that has to do with the 17th and the 26th degree, which is a magical biological tendency. And finally, we have a weak biological tendency between the 27th and the 5th degree of the next sign, which is, I think, very important because if you have a link with your past, you may break it easier if you have a weak biological tendency. But let's say, for example, you have a problem that you inherited through your mother and your father. This strong effect is going to be even more in even more tense if you have a planet between the 5th and the 16th degree of a sign. But also, according to the Huber astrology, the Huber psychological astrology, every house is separated in 3 places: the cardinal, the stable, and the mutable. And that means that when we have a house, the first degrees of this house usually belong to the cardinal place of this house. Then we have the stable part and finally the mutable part. Those that have planets according to the cardinal place means that there is an environmental demand, and when you have things in your stable part of your house, there is a major environmental demand. And finally, when you have the mutable phase, you have a very low environmental demand. So when we look at things that were very important to us, always look around the start of a house and a little behind, around 1 or 2 degrees behind, always using Koch because Huber used Koch and we didn't test that in Placidus or whatever other system you may use. So looking at the environmental tendencies, we can understand what our environment sometimes may need from us. And let's say that we have a great aspect between Venus being in Taurus and Mars being in Virgo, and this Venus is also on the first house. This means that this aspect is going to be very fluent to our life, and we're going to feel great because this Venus in Taurus is powerful and the environment is demanding to show that. But let's say that you are going to have a bad aspect between Moon and Pluto. You have a square between Moon and Pluto, okay? And this Moon, although it's strong because it may be in the 10th degree of an aspect, so it has a strong biological basis. On the other hand, is on the mutable part of a house. That means that this concept with a mother that may be very hard to control, and is a mother that sometimes brings some vampiric tendencies to your psychological situation, may not be so powerful because the environmental tendency is not helpful to solve that in your life. So we may have biological tendencies, but we have also an environment that we live, and this environment sometimes shows us what is really going to happen. We are a mix, nature and nurture, and this is something that we can see in our natal charts.